Take a moment to imagine this. 20,000 years ago, if you could have stood where New York City now bustles with 8 million people, you would have been standing beneath a wall of ice nearly 2 miles thick. The entire landscape, stretching endlessly in every direction, would have been a frozen wasteland that makes Antarctica look hospitable. And yet, this wasn't some distant alien world. This was Earth, our Earth, the same planet that gave birth to every civilization, every work of art, every moment of human love and loss you've ever known. Tonight we're going to step back into that frozen world together, not just to observe it from a comfortable distance, but to truly understand what it meant to exist during one of the most extreme periods in our planet's recent history. Because the story of the Ice Age isn't just about ice and cold, it's about survival, transformation, and the incredible resilience of life itself when faced with conditions so harsh they challenge everything we think we know about what's possible on Earth. Before we begin this journey, I'd love to know where you are right now as you're listening to this. Are you somewhere warm, perhaps with a cup of tea beside you? Or maybe you're in a place where winter still holds its grip, where you can step outside and feel just a whisper of what our ancestors faced every single day for thousands upon thousands of years. Wherever you are, whatever time it is in your corner of the world, we're about to travel together to a time when the very concept of warmth was a luxury most of the planet had forgotten. If you find yourself drawn to these kinds of explorations, these quiet journeys through deep time and forgotten worlds, it would mean a lot if you took a moment to subscribe. This is the kind of conversation that reaches people slowly, thoughtfully, one curious mind at a time. And there are others like you out there, searching for something more substantial than the noise of daily life, something that connects us to the vast story we're all part of. Let's start with a number that's almost impossible to truly comprehend. 6 degrees Celsius. 11 degrees Fahrenheit. That's how much colder the entire planet was during what scientists call the Last Glacial Maximum, the deepest point of the most recent ice age, roughly 21,000 years ago. Now 6 degrees might not sound like much. It's the difference between a slightly chilly day and a moderately cold one. But when applied to an entire planet, to every ocean current, every weather pattern, every growing season, across all the continents, 6 degrees becomes the difference between the world we know and a world so transformed it might as well be another planet entirely. During this period, something extraordinary happened to Earth's water. Imagine if you could gather all the water from every lake, every river, every rainstorm, and instead of letting it flow and cycle as it does today, you froze it solid and piled it up in massive sheets across entire continents. That's essentially what happened. So much water was locked away in ice that the oceans dropped more than 400 feet below their current levels. Coastlines that today lie beneath hundreds of feet of ocean were dry land, supporting forests and grasslands and herds of animals that have no modern equivalent. The ice sheets themselves were monuments to the power of gradual change. The Laurentide Ice Sheet, which covered much of what is now Canada and the northern United States, was over 2 miles thick in places. 2 miles of solid ice pressing down on the Earth's crust with such tremendous weight that the land itself bent and warped beneath it. And this wasn't just a temporary phenomenon. These ice sheets had been growing, advancing, retreating, and advancing again for millions of years, carving valleys that would later become the Great Lakes, shaping mountain ranges and literally sculpting the geography of entire continents. But here's what makes this story even more remarkable. While vast portions of the Northern Hemisphere were buried beneath this frozen armour, life didn't simply hide and wait for better times. It adapted, evolved, and in some cases thrived in ways that challenge our understanding of what's possible. The Ice Age wasn't just a period of survival. It was a time of innovation, both biological and eventually human. To understand just how different this world was, we need to abandon almost everything we think we know about geography. The maps in our classrooms, the satellite images we're used to seeing, the very shape of the continents themselves, all of it was different. Where the Bering Strait now separates Alaska from Russia by 55 miles of cold ocean, there stretched a land bridge larger than Texas and California combined. Scientists call it Beringia, and for thousands of years it was home to one of the most diverse and productive ecosystems the planet has ever known. This wasn't just a narrow strip of land connecting two continents. Beringia was a world unto itself, a vast tundra steppe that supported an abundance of life that seems almost mythical today. Herds of woolly mammoths, some standing 14 feet tall, roamed across grasslands that stretched beyond the horizon. Alongside them moved woolly rhinoceroses, cave lions larger than any predator alive today, and giant short-faced bears that could run as fast as a horse, despite weighing over a ton. But perhaps the most remarkable residents of this lost world were the horses. Not the descendants of European horses brought to the Americas by conquistadors, but Native American horses that had evolved here over millions of years. These Ice Age horses were smaller than their modern cousins, stockier, built for endurance in a harsh climate. They lived alongside steppe bison, musk oxen, and creatures called saiga antelopes, whose inflated nasal passages helped them warm the frigid air before it reached their lungs. Scientists estimate that the total biomass of large mammals during this period was 100 times greater than what we see in the Arctic today. 100 times. Think about that for a moment. Imagine the African savanna at its most abundant, then multiply that abundance by orders of magnitude, and you begin to approach what Beringia was like during the height of the Ice Age. And it wasn't just Beringia. Across what is now Europe and Asia, a similar ecosystem stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific. They call it the Mammoth Steppe, and it was the largest biome in Earth's history. A continuous grassland ecosystem that supported more large mammals than any environment before or since. Now you might be wondering how such abundance was possible in a world locked in ice. This is where the story becomes more nuanced, more beautiful in its complexity. The Ice Age wasn't uniformly cold everywhere. While massive glaciers dominated the northern latitudes, other regions experienced what we might call refugia, pockets of relatively mild climate where life could concentrate and diversify. In what is now the Mediterranean region, for instance, a complex mosaic of microclimates provided shelter for both temperate and cold-adapted species. These weren't tropical paradises by any means, but they were warm enough to support forests and the animals that depended on them. Some scientists believe these refugia were crucial, not just for the survival of individual species, but for the preservation of genetic diversity that would later fuel the repopulation of the world as the ice retreated. Africa presents perhaps the most fascinating study in contrasts during this period. While the Sahara Desert was even larger and more forbidding than it is today, sub-Saharan Africa served as a refuge for early human populations. The great rainforests of the Congo Basin, though significantly reduced from their current size, still provided a green heart in a world increasingly dominated by ice and drought. It's likely that human populations concentrated in these remaining habitable areas experienced pressures that drove technological innovation and cultural development, innovations that would later prove crucial as our species began to expand across the globe. The ocean currents during this time were dramatically different as well, creating their own patterns of warmth and cold that seem almost alien when compared to today's climate. The Gulf Stream, which today brings warm water from the Caribbean to warm the shores of Britain and Norway, followed a very different path. The massive ice sheets altered wind patterns, which in turn redirected ocean currents, creating a complex web of climate effects that reached into every corner of the planet. One of the most striking features of the Ice Age world was its atmosphere. If you could travel back to this time, one of the first things you'd notice wouldn't be the cold, though that would certainly be overwhelming. It would be the dust. Ice core samples from this period show that the atmosphere contained 20 to 25 times more dust than it does today. The sky would have had a perpetual haze, a dusty quality that filtered sunlight and created spectacular but eerie sunrises and sunsets. This dust came from multiple sources. The massive ice sheets ground rock into fine powder as they moved. The reduced vegetation meant there were fewer plants to hold soil in place. Stronger winds, driven by the extreme temperature differences between the ice-covered north and the warmer regions to the south, picked up this loose material and carried it vast distances. Dust from North America has been found in ice cores from Greenland. Saharan dust reached as far as the Amazon basin, though in much greater quantities than today. But this dust wasn't just a curiosity. It played an active role in the climate system, reflecting sunlight back to space and contributing to the cooling that maintained the ice sheets. It was a feedback loop that helped lock the planet into its frozen state for thousands of years. The more ice there was, the more dust in the atmosphere. The more dust in the atmosphere, the cooler the planet became. The cooler the planet became, the more ice formed. This atmospheric condition would have created some truly spectacular natural phenomena. Aurora displays, driven by the interaction between solar particles and Earth's magnetic field, would have been visible much farther south than they are today. The clearer, drier air in many regions would have made the night sky appear almost impossibly brilliant, with the Milky Way standing out in sharp relief against the darkness. And then, in this harsh but magnificent world, there were the humans, our direct ancestors, people who were physically indistinguishable from us today, facing conditions that would challenge the most advanced survival technology we possess. Recent archaeological evidence has revealed something remarkable about these Ice Age humans that contradicts many of our previous assumptions about how they survived. Rather than retreating to small refugia and barely hanging on until the ice retreated, many human populations remained spread across Europe and Asia even during the harshest periods. They followed a survival strategy similar to that of wolves and bears, adapting to a wide range of habitats and maintaining their presence across vast territories even when conditions seemed impossible. These weren't the crude cave dwellers of popular imagination. Archaeological sites from this period reveal sophisticated tool technologies, complex social structures, and artistic achievements that rival anything produced in more temperate times. The famous cave paintings of Lascaux and Altamira were created during or shortly after the height of the last ice age by people who had not only survived the harshest conditions on Earth, but had maintained the cultural sophistication to create lasting works of art. Their clothing was ingeniously designed for extreme cold, with layered garments that provided insulation while allowing for the mobility needed for hunting and gathering. They built substantial shelters, often using the bones of mammoths and other megafauna as structural elements, covered with carefully prepared hides that could withstand the fierce winds and bitter cold. But perhaps most remarkably, these Ice Age humans were innovators. The pressure of survival in such extreme conditions drove technological advances that would later spread across the world as the ice retreated. They developed new hunting strategies, new tools, new ways of processing and preserving food. They learned to read weather patterns, to predict the movements of game animals, to find water in a landscape where most surface water was frozen solid for much of the year. The story of how our ancestors not only survived but flourished during the Ice Age is still being written as archaeologists uncover new evidence of their ingenuity and resilience. And as we'll discover in the next part of our journey, their survival strategies and innovations would ultimately enable one of the most remarkable migrations in the history of life on Earth. But that's a story for another time. What we've explored tonight is just the beginning of understanding what Earth was truly like during this extraordinary period. We've seen how a change of just 6 degrees could transform an entire planet, how life found ways to thrive in conditions that seem impossible, and how our own species began developing the tools and knowledge that would eventually carry us to every corner of the globe. The Ice Age challenges us to think differently about resilience, about adaptation, and about the incredible capacity of life to not just survive, but to create beauty and meaning, even in the harshest conditions. Tomorrow, when you step outside and feel the warmth of the sun on your face, you'll carry with you the knowledge of just how precious and temporary that warmth really is, and just how remarkable it is that we're here to feel it at all. In our next exploration, we'll journey even further back to discover what life on Earth was like in the age of dinosaurs, where we'll uncover how a planet even more alien than the Ice Age world gave birth to creatures that make woolly mammoths look small. In the quiet moments before dawn, 20,000 years ago, small bands of humans were making decisions that would echo through millennia. They were following herds across landscapes we can barely imagine, tracking ancient pathways that connected worlds we now think of as separate. These weren't desperate refugees fleeing the ice. These were skilled hunters, experienced travellers, people who had learned to read the subtle signs of a planet in constant motion. The great migrations of the Ice Age weren't single journeys, but ongoing adventures that unfolded over thousands of years. Families would follow the seasonal movements of mammoth herds, learning the rhythms of animals whose migrations covered thousands of miles. Generation after generation, knowledge accumulated about which valleys offered shelter from the worst storms, where fresh water could be found when rivers froze solid, which plants remained edible even under snow. What's remarkable is how these migrations weren't just about survival, they were about discovery. Each new valley, each unexplored ridge, each river crossing represented an expansion of human understanding about what was possible on Earth. These Ice Age explorers were developing a sophisticated knowledge of geography, weather patterns, animal behavior, and resource management that would make modern wilderness experts seem like beginners. Recent genetic studies have revealed something extraordinary about these ancient migrations. The DNA of people living today carries echoes of journeys that began during the coldest periods of the Ice Age. We can trace the movements of small groups as they spread across continents, adapted to new environments, and eventually populated every habitable corner of the planet. In a very real sense, the courage and curiosity of Ice Age humans made possible every human achievement that followed. But perhaps the most audacious journey of all was the one that led to the peopling of the Americas. Somewhere around 15 to 20,000 years ago, groups of humans began crossing from Asia into what is now Alaska. They weren't following a map or responding to reports from earlier explorers. They were venturing into a completely unknown continent, guided only by the movements of the animals they hunted and their own inexhaustible curiosity about what lay beyond the horizon. Picture this scene. A family group crests a ridge in what is now central Alaska and looks out over a landscape that no human eyes have ever seen before. Stretching ahead of them are vast grasslands, dotted with herds of animals they recognize, mammoths and bison and horses, but also creatures they've never encountered. Giant ground sloths the size of small cars lumber through valleys where aspen trees grow in sheltered spots. Short-faced bears standing 12 feet tall when they rear up on their hind legs, patrol territories that extend for hundreds of miles. This was the new world during the Ice Age, a continent teeming with megafauna that existed nowhere else on Earth. The Columbian mammoth, larger even than the woolly mammoth of the northern steppes, moved in herds across what would one day become the Great Plains. Saber-toothed cats with 6-inch fangs specialized in hunting these giants, using their massive canine teeth to deliver precise, fatal wounds to the necks of prey animals weighing several tons. In South America, the diversity was even more spectacular. Giant armadillos called glyptodonts, some as large as small cars, wandered through forests alongside ground sloths that weighed as much as elephants. Terror birds, flightless predators standing 10 feet tall, were the apex predators in many regions, using their massive beaks to hunt prey that included early horses and camels that had evolved in the Americas millions of years before their relatives appeared in the Old World. The humans who entered this world brought with them knowledge accumulated over thousands of years of Ice Age survival. They knew how to make sophisticated tools, how to work together to hunt animals much larger than themselves, how to preserve meat for long periods, and how to adapt quickly to new environments. But they also brought something else, something that would prove to be one of their most powerful tools for survival in this new world. They brought fire. The controlled use of fire was perhaps the single most important technology that Ice Age humans possessed. It provided warmth in a world where temperatures could kill within hours. It extended the day, allowing for activities that would have been impossible in the long Arctic nights. It made tough plant foods digestible and helped preserve meat. But most importantly for these new arrivals in the Americas, fire was a tool for landscape management on a massive scale. Understanding how Ice Age humans used fire requires us to think beyond the cozy campfire scenes we often imagine. These people were ecosystem engineers, using controlled burns to shape entire landscapes in ways that benefited both humans and the animals they hunted. They understood that fire could stimulate new plant growth, creating the kind of grasslands that supported large herds of grazing animals. They knew that burning undergrowth made travel easier and hunting more successful. Archaeological evidence from across North and South America suggests that human-controlled burning began almost immediately after the first people arrived. This wasn't random destruction, but careful, sophisticated land management based on deep observation of natural fire cycles and plant responses. Indigenous peoples maintained this knowledge for thousands of years, creating and maintaining grasslands, oak savannas, and other ecosystems that European settlers would later assume were completely natural. The partnership between humans and fire during the Ice Age represents one of the earliest examples of large-scale environmental modification by our species. But it was modification that worked with natural processes rather than against them. These fires mimicked and enhanced natural fire cycles, creating habitats that supported greater diversity and abundance of life, rather than destroying it. This relationship with fire also reveals something profound about how Ice Age humans saw their place in the world. They didn't view themselves as separate from nature or as its masters. They understood themselves as participants in complex ecological relationships, beings whose actions had consequences that rippled through entire ecosystems. This wasn't modern environmentalism, but it was a sophisticated understanding of ecological interconnection that many modern societies have lost. The controlled use of fire may also have played a role in one of the most mysterious aspects of the Ice Age, the extinction of the megafauna. As the climate began to warm and the great ice sheets started their slow retreat, something happened to the giants of the Ice Age world. Across North and South America, and to a lesser extent in other parts of the world, the largest animals began to disappear. The story of what happened to the Ice Age megafauna is one of the most compelling mysteries in all of science. Over the course of just a few thousand years, as the ice sheets retreated and the modern world began to emerge, dozens of species of large mammals simply vanished. The woolly mammoth, the giant ground sloths, the saber-toothed cats, the short-faced bears, all of them disappeared, leaving behind only their bones and the ecosystems they had shaped for millions of years. What makes this extinction event so puzzling is its selectivity. While the giants died out, smaller animals survived and often thrived. The horses and camels that had evolved in the Americas disappeared, but deer and elk expanded their ranges. The massive cave lions vanished, but smaller predators like wolves and cougars not only survived but spread into new territories as the ice retreated. For decades, scientists have debated whether climate change, human hunting, or some combination of both factors caused these extinctions. The timing is suspicious, the disappearances often coinciding closely with the arrival of human populations in different regions. But the climate was changing dramatically as well, and many of these animals were specialists adapted to the cold, dry conditions of the Ice Age world. Recent research using ancient DNA has revealed that the story is far more complex than either simple explanation suggests. Different species responded differently to the changing conditions. Some populations of woolly mammoths, for instance, survived on remote islands for thousands of years after their mainland cousins had disappeared, finally going extinct, only when inbreeding and loss of genetic diversity made survival impossible. The Beringian woolly mammoths show a particularly interesting pattern. They were abundant from about 45,000 to 30,000 years ago, then experienced a long, gradual decline that coincided with changes in climate, habitat, and the presence of humans. This wasn't a sudden collapse, but a slow fade that played out over millennia as multiple pressures combined to make survival increasingly difficult. What emerges from this research is a picture of extinction as a process rather than an event. These animals didn't simply vanish overnight. They experienced thousands of years of gradually increasing stress as their world transformed around them. Climate change altered the vegetation they depended on. Rising sea levels eliminated crucial habitat. Human hunting added another pressure to animals already struggling to adapt to rapidly changing conditions. As we watch this great transformation unfold, as the ice sheets begin their retreat and the giants of the Ice Age world fade into memory, we're witnessing more than just the end of one era. We're seeing the birth of the world we know today. The retreating glaciers left behind the Great Lakes carved the valleys that would become major river systems and deposited the fertile soils that would eventually support agriculture and civilization. The humans who survived this period of dramatic change carried with them not just their genes, but their knowledge, their technologies, their stories. The innovations developed during the harsh conditions of the Ice Age, the sophisticated tool-making techniques, the understanding of fire management, the ability to read weather patterns and animal behavior, all of these would prove crucial as humans adapted to the warmer, more forested world that emerged as the ice retreated. But perhaps most importantly, they carried with them the knowledge that dramatic change was possible. They had lived through the transformation of an entire planet. They had seen ice sheets miles thick melt away, watched sea levels rise hundreds of feet, witnessed the birth of new lakes and rivers, and the death of ancient ecosystems. They understood in their bones that the world was not fixed, that adaptation and innovation were not luxuries but necessities for survival. This understanding would shape human culture in profound ways. The myths and stories that emerged from Ice Age experiences often centered on themes of transformation, of worlds that could be created and destroyed, of the need for wisdom and preparation in the face of unpredictable change. These weren't abstract philosophical concepts, but practical knowledge encoded in stories that helped ensure survival. The Ice Age also left its mark on human genetics in ways we're only beginning to understand. Populations that survived the harsh conditions developed adaptations that persist today. The ability to metabolize certain foods efficiently, resistance to specific diseases, even aspects of our psychology and behavior may carry echoes of the challenges our ancestors faced during those frozen millennia. The end of the Ice Age wasn't a simple matter of the world gradually getting warmer. It was a period of dramatic instability, with the climate swinging back and forth between glacial and interglacial conditions. Around 12,000 years ago, just as it seemed the ice was finally retreating for good, a period called the Younger Dryas brought a sudden return to near-glacial conditions that lasted for over 1,000 years. This climate whiplash had profound effects on both human populations and the surviving megafauna. Some regions that had begun to warm and green up suddenly returned to tundra conditions. Rivers that had been flowing freely froze solid again. The vegetation that had started to colonize newly ice-free areas died back, forcing both animals and humans to adapt once again to harsher conditions. When the warming finally resumed and the Younger Dryas ended as abruptly as it had begun, it set in motion changes that would reshape the planet. The massive ice sheets that had dominated the northern continents for thousands of years began their final retreat, releasing enormous quantities of meltwater into the oceans. This wasn't a gradual process, but often happened in dramatic bursts as ice dams failed and entire lakes' worth of water rushed toward the sea. These meltwater floods were among the largest natural disasters in Earth's recent history. Lake Missoula, formed behind an ice dam in what is now Montana, contained more water than Lakes Erie and Ontario combined. When the dam finally failed, the resulting flood carved the channeled scablands of Washington state in a matter of days, moving boulders the size of houses and stripping away hundreds of feet of soil and rock. Similar floods occurred across the northern hemisphere as the ice sheets retreated. The English Channel was carved by meltwater floods that drained a vast lake where the North Sea now lies. The Great Lakes were formed and reformed multiple times as different drainage routes opened and closed. These floods didn't just reshape the landscape, they altered ocean circulation patterns and may have triggered additional climate changes that rippled across the globe. For the humans living through this period, these changes represented both tremendous challenges and unprecedented opportunities. As the ice retreated, vast new territories became available for exploration and settlement. But the landscape was unstable, subject to sudden floods, changing river courses, and the collapse of ice-dammed lakes. Survival required not just adaptability, but the ability to read the signs of impending change and respond quickly when disaster struck. The warming world also brought new resources and new challenges. Forests began to spread across landscapes that had been tundra for thousands of years, providing new materials for tools and shelter, but also changing the behavior of game animals. The ocean, fed by meltwater from the retreating glaciers, rose rapidly, flooding coastal areas and forcing human populations to adapt to new shorelines. This period of rapid environmental change may have been crucial in driving the development of agriculture. As wild food resources became less predictable and human populations grew, the ability to cultivate and control food production would have provided a crucial advantage. The transition from hunting and gathering to farming wasn't just a technological revolution, but a response to the environmental instability of the post-Ice Age world. The knowledge and skills developed during the Ice Age would prove crucial for navigating this period of change. The ability to read environmental signs, to adapt quickly to new conditions, to work together in the face of uncertainty. All of these qualities that had been essential for survival in the frozen world would be equally important as that world transformed into something entirely new. And as we'll discover, this capacity for adaptation and innovation that was forged in the crucible of the Ice Age would eventually carry our species to achievements that would have been unimaginable to those early survivors huddled around fires on the frozen steppes of ancient Beringia. As the great ice sheets retreated and the world transformed around them, the humans who had survived the harshest period in recent planetary history carried within them something precious beyond measure. It wasn't gold or tools or territorial knowledge, though they possessed all of these. What they carried was memory, the living memory of a world so different from what was emerging that it might as well have been another planet entirely. These memory keepers understood things that no human alive today has experienced firsthand. They knew what it meant to live in a world where the very air was thick with dust, where the aurora danced in skies far to the south of where we see them now, where the sound of cracking ice could be heard for miles as glaciers shifted and moved like sleeping giants. They had watched herds of woolly mammoths stretch to the horizon, had learned to read the subtle signs that predicted the movements of animals whose like will never be seen again. This knowledge didn't disappear when the ice retreated. It was woven into stories, encoded in myths, passed down through generations in forms we might not immediately recognize as historical records. The flood myths that appear in cultures around the world may carry echoes of those catastrophic meltwater releases. The stories of giants and monsters might preserve memories of the megafauna that once shared the world with our ancestors. But the memory keepers preserved more than just stories. They carried forward the practical knowledge that had enabled survival in impossible conditions. Techniques for reading weather patterns, for finding water in frozen landscapes, for working together in small groups to accomplish tasks that would have been impossible alone. These skills would prove essential as human populations grew and spread into every corner of the warming world. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed just how sophisticated this preserved knowledge was. Sites across Europe and Asia show evidence of astronomical observations that date back to the height of the Ice Age. These weren't casual glances at the night sky, but careful systematic tracking of celestial movements that required generations of accumulated observation. The people who created these records understood that the patterns they saw in the sky were connected to the patterns they experienced on Earth. This astronomical knowledge may have been crucial for navigation during the great migrations that followed the retreat of the ice. Without magnetic compasses or GPS, these ancient travelers relied on their ability to read the stars, to understand the relationship between celestial movements and seasonal changes, to navigate across vast distances using knowledge that had been refined over thousands of years of careful observation. As the ice retreated and forests began to spread across landscapes that had been tundra for millennia, the world experienced what we might call the greatest rewilding event in recent history. But this wasn't the simple return of a previous state. The world that emerged from the Ice Age was something entirely new, shaped by the selective pressures of the glacial period and the dramatic changes that followed. The forests that spread across Europe and North America were different from those that had existed before the ice came. The species that survived the glacial period were those that had proven most adaptable to harsh conditions. When they emerged from their refugia and began to recolonize the warming world, they brought with them genetic adaptations that had been forged in the crucible of extreme cold and scarcity. Trees that had learned to survive with minimal growing seasons now found themselves with longer, warmer summers. Animals that had adapted to scarce resources suddenly had access to abundant food sources. The result was an explosion of growth and diversity that transformed entire continents within just a few thousand years. But this rewilding wasn't happening in isolation from human influence. The people emerging from the Ice Age brought with them sophisticated techniques for landscape management that had been developed during the harsh glacial conditions. Their use of controlled burning, their understanding of animal behavior, their knowledge of plant ecology all played crucial roles in shaping the post-glacial world. In many regions, what we think of as natural landscapes were actually the result of thousands of years of careful human management. The oak savannas of North America, the heather moorlands of Scotland, the grasslands of the Great Plains, all of these ecosystems were shaped by human activity, using techniques that had been refined during the Ice Age. This partnership between humans and the natural world represented something unique in the planet's history. Previous mass extinctions had been followed by long periods of recovery, during which evolution slowly filled the empty ecological niches. But the post-Ice Age world was being actively shaped by an intelligent species that understood ecological relationships and could manipulate them on a landscape scale. The results were often spectacular. Archaeological evidence suggests that some post-glacial ecosystems supported even greater biodiversity than we see today. The careful management of fire cycles, the selective hunting of certain species, the cultivation of useful plants, all of these activities created a mosaic of habitats that supported an incredible variety of life. Modern genetic research has revealed that the Ice Age left its mark not just on landscapes and ecosystems, but on the DNA of every species that survived that frozen world. The selective pressures of extreme cold, limited resources, and dramatic environmental change shaped the genetic makeup of plants, animals, and humans in ways that persist to this day. In humans, these genetic echoes are particularly fascinating. Populations that survived in different Ice Age refugia developed distinct genetic adaptations that reflect the challenges they faced. Some groups developed enhanced abilities to metabolize certain nutrients that were scarce during glacial periods. Others evolved resistance to diseases that would have been particularly deadly in crowded winter shelters. The Inuit peoples of the Arctic carry genetic adaptations that allow them to thrive on diets that would be unhealthy for most other human populations. Their bodies are extraordinarily efficient at metabolizing fats and proteins while requiring fewer carbohydrates than people from more temperate climates. These adaptations almost certainly have their roots in the Ice Age, when similar dietary constraints would have been common across much of the Northern Hemisphere. European populations carry genetic variants that improve their ability to digest milk into adulthood, an adaptation that may have been crucial during periods when dairy products provided essential nutrition during long winters. The prevalence of these variants in Northern European populations suggests they were strongly selected for during the harsh conditions of the glacial period. But perhaps most intriguingly, recent research has suggested that some aspects of human psychology and behavior may also carry Ice Age echoes. The human tendency towards seasonal affective disorder, for instance, might represent a vestigial adaptation to the extreme seasonal variations that characterized Ice Age climates. Our species' remarkable ability to form cooperative bonds with non-relatives may have been enhanced by selective pressures that favored groups capable of working together during periods of extreme scarcity. Even our artistic impulses might carry forward traditions that began during the Ice Age. The cave paintings of Lascaux and Altamira were created by people living under conditions far harsher than anything most modern humans have experienced. Yet they took the time and effort to create works of stunning beauty and sophistication. This suggests that artistic expression wasn't a luxury that emerged only after basic survival needs were met, but a fundamental human capacity that persisted even under the most challenging conditions. The genetic legacy of the Ice Age extends far beyond humans. Many of the plants and animals we share the world with today carry within their DNA the story of that frozen epoch. The incredible cold tolerance of some tree species, the migration patterns of birds, the social behaviors of mammals, all of these traits were shaped by the selective pressures of a world locked in ice. As we follow the threads of this story forward through time, we begin to see how the experiences of the Ice Age planted seeds that would eventually grow into human civilization itself. The challenges of survival in extreme conditions had forced our ancestors to develop technologies, social structures, and ways of thinking about the world that would prove crucial as human populations grew and societies became more complex. The sophisticated tool-making techniques developed during the Ice Age provided the foundation for all subsequent technological developments. The ability to work stone, bone, and organic materials into precisely shaped implements required not just manual skill, but deep understanding of material properties and manufacturing processes. These weren't crude survival tools, but sophisticated instruments that often required hours or days of careful work to complete. More importantly, the creation of these tools required the ability to plan ahead, to envision a finished product before beginning work, and to maintain focus on complex, multi-step processes. These cognitive abilities, refined over thousands of generations of Ice Age survival, would later prove essential for agriculture, architecture, and every other technological achievement that followed. The social structures that enabled Ice Age survival also laid groundwork for later civilizations. Small hunting bands had to develop systems for sharing resources, making collective decisions, and coordinating complex activities like mammoth hunts that might involve dozens of people working together over several days. The leadership structures, conflict resolution mechanisms, and social norms that emerged from these requirements would later be scaled up to manage much larger communities. Perhaps most significantly, Ice Age humans developed sophisticated systems for storing and transmitting knowledge across generations. Without written language, they had to rely on memory, story, and direct instruction to pass on crucial survival information. This oral tradition wasn't just about preserving facts, but about embedding knowledge in memorable forms that could be accurately transmitted even when circumstances were chaotic or resources scarce. The astronomical observations we mentioned earlier represent just one example of how complex knowledge could be preserved and transmitted through oral traditions. The builders of Stonehenge, working thousands of years after the end of the Ice Age, incorporated astronomical alignments that suggest they had access to observational records spanning centuries or even millennia. This knowledge could only have been preserved through sophisticated oral traditions that had their roots in Ice Age survival practices. As we near the end of our journey through this frozen world, it's worth stepping back to consider what the Ice Age reveals about the nature of time itself and our place within the vast rhythms of planetary change. From our human perspective, 20,000 years seems almost incomprehensibly long. It represents roughly 1,000 generations of human life, more than twice the entire span of recorded history. Yet from the perspective of the planet, the Ice Age was just one beat in a much longer rhythm. Earth has experienced numerous ice ages over the past few million years, each lasting tens of thousands of years, separated by warmer interglacial periods, like the one we're living in now. These cycles are driven by subtle changes in Earth's orbit and tilt, variations so small they would be imperceptible to anyone living through them, yet powerful enough to transform the entire planet over geological time. Understanding this rhythm helps us appreciate both the resilience and the fragility of the world we inhabit today. The warm, stable climate that has allowed human civilization to flourish is not the normal state of our planet. For most of the past few million years, Earth has been much colder than it is now, with ice sheets covering vast areas of what we consider the most habitable regions. This perspective doesn't diminish the significance of current climate change, but it does provide context for understanding how dramatic and rapid climate shifts can be. The people who lived through the end of the Ice Age experienced changes in global temperature that occurred over just a few thousand years, changes that completely transformed the geography, ecosystems, and possibilities of their world. Their response to these changes demonstrates something profound about the human capacity for adaptation. Rather than being passive victims of climate change, Ice Age humans actively shaped their response to changing conditions. They developed new technologies, modified their social structures, altered their relationships with the landscape, and ultimately used the challenges they faced as opportunities for innovation and growth. This active engagement with environmental change may be one of the most important lessons we can learn from the Ice Age. The people who thrived during that period weren't those who tried to maintain the status quo in the face of changing conditions. They were the ones who embraced change as an opportunity for learning, adaptation, and ultimately, transformation. As our exploration of the Ice Age draws toward a close, we find ourselves confronting a profound paradox. The world we've been exploring, this realm of ice and giants and endless migrations, is simultaneously completely alien to our experience and intimately familiar. It's alien because the physical conditions were so different from anything we know today, yet it's familiar because it was inhabited by people who were in every essential way exactly like us. The humans who survived the Ice Age had the same capacity for wonder, creativity, and love that drives human life today. They formed deep emotional bonds with their families and communities. They created art that still moves us 20,000 years later. They told stories around fires that may have contained the seeds of myths we still tell today. They looked up at the same stars we see, though from a world so different, it might as well have been another planet. This connection across vast spans of time reveals something beautiful about the human experience. Despite all the changes in technology, society, and environment that separate us from our Ice Age ancestors, we share with them the fundamental experience of being conscious beings trying to make sense of our place in a vast and often mysterious universe. The questions that drove their lives are still the questions that drive ours. How do we survive and thrive in challenging conditions? How do we maintain hope and meaning when the future is uncertain? How do we balance individual needs with collective welfare? How do we pass on what we've learned to future generations? How do we find beauty and joy even in difficult circumstances? The Ice Age offers no easy answers to these questions, but it does provide evidence that human beings have faced seemingly impossible challenges before, and not just survived, but emerged stronger, more creative, and more capable than before. The innovations developed during that harsh period provided the foundation for agriculture, cities, art, science, and every other achievement of human civilization. Perhaps most importantly, the Ice Age demonstrates that change, even dramatic change, doesn't have to mean catastrophe. The people who lived through the transition from the glacial world to our modern interglacial period experienced transformations that were far more dramatic than anything recorded in human history. Yet they adapted, innovated, and ultimately created possibilities that hadn't existed before. This doesn't mean that change is easy or that its costs can be ignored. The Ice Age was also a time of tremendous hardship, loss, and struggle. Many species didn't survive the transition. Human populations experienced bottlenecks that brought our species close to extinction. The knowledge, cultures, and ways of life that were lost during this period can never be recovered. But the overall story is one of resilience, creativity, and the remarkable capacity of life to not just endure, but to transform challenges into opportunities for growth and innovation. The world that emerged from the Ice Age was not just different from what came before, it was in many ways richer, more diverse, and full of new possibilities. As we prepare to leave this frozen world behind and return to our own time, it's worth taking a moment to consider how the story of the Ice Age might inform our understanding of the challenges we face today. We live in another period of rapid environmental change, though this time driven by human activity rather than orbital cycles. The pace of change we're experiencing is actually much faster than what occurred during the transition out of the Ice Age, compressed into centuries rather than millennia. Yet the fundamental challenge remains the same. How do we adapt to changing conditions while maintaining the things we value most about human life and civilization? How do we innovate and create new solutions while preserving the knowledge and wisdom that has sustained us through previous challenges? The Ice Age suggests that the answer lies not in trying to prevent all change, but in developing the capacity to respond to change creatively and constructively. The people who thrived during that period weren't those who had the most resources or the most comfortable conditions. They were those who were most capable of learning, adapting, and working together in the face of uncertainty. This perspective doesn't minimize the real challenges we face today, but it does suggest that human beings have remarkable capacities for innovation and adaptation when circumstances demand it. The technologies, social structures, and ways of thinking that allowed our ancestors to survive and thrive during the Ice Age may not be directly applicable to modern conditions, but the underlying principles, cooperation, innovation, long-term thinking, and the ability to find meaning and beauty even in difficult circumstances remain as relevant today as they were 20,000 years ago. Perhaps most importantly, the Ice Age reminds us that we are part of a story much larger than ourselves. The challenges we face today are connected to challenges that human beings have been facing for thousands of generations. The solutions we develop will become part of the inheritance we pass on to future generations, just as our ancestors passed on to us the knowledge and capacities they developed during the frozen world of the glacial period. The story of the Ice Age is ultimately the story of us. It's written in the DNA we carry, in the landscapes we inhabit, and in the deep wells of resilience that still surface when we face the impossible. Those frozen millennia weren't just survived by our ancestors, they were transformed into something beautiful, something that made every sunrise since then a gift we almost never received. Tonight, when you look up at the stars, you're seeing them through eyes shaped by ice and wonder, carried forward by people who refused to surrender to a world that seemed determined to erase them entirely. If this journey through deep time has stirred something in you, our another exploration awaits in What Life on Earth Was Like in the Age of Dinosaurs.